and welcome to the Farm Ed podcast. I'm Kate Henderson, and today we're going to be talking about farm clusters. So today we're joined by Tim Field. Tim, welcome to the podcast. So you are the facilitator for the North East Cotswold farmer cluster. Can you firstly start off by just telling us what is a farm cluster?
Well, farm cluster it's coined by the Game Wildlife Conservation Trust as a group of farmers working together for knowledge exchange and project work. But actually, it predates that naming of cluster, and the Farmer Guardians, the Upper Thames and others actually go back a bit further than that. But over the last sort of 10 or 15 years, it's a term that explains a group of farms in the landscape getting together for that knowledge exchange and project work.
And so the North East Cotswold farmer cluster, when did that begin?
So we kicked off just before COVID, actually, whenever that was. There's a core group around Lynham on the River Evenlode, in the Evenlode catchment up in the top of the Thames in West Oxfordshire. And the group of landowners and farmers that wanted to work together to improve the water quality of the River Evenlode, reduce flooding. There's some real pollinator enthusiasts, wildflower meadow enthusiasts, and just start to work together, kit share, exchange knowledge of public subsidies and so on. So that was around about 2020. But we formally had our first steering group meeting and brainstorm at Farm Ed before it. I think we were one of the first events before it properly opened during COVID, and we had a flip chart and put down some objectives and missions and things like that. And then I suppose in July 2021 was where we officially sort of became a community interest company. So we're a formal entity which helps receive grants and be a bit more professional about raising money and spending it.
And so knowledge exchange is a key thing, a key part of a cluster group. What events have been sort of most popular? What have you found that you've had the most interest in?
Good question. So we have had a lot more uptake when you're out on farm seeing different farms. And there'll be two reasons for that. One is people genuinely want to learn about the subject matter, and we'll have an expert or two, a farm advisor or an academic, a researcher, come along to a farm to talk with the farmer about what's going on in the fields or the hedgerows or the watercourses in that situation. So there will be those that turn up to those that are genuinely sort of interested in the subject matter. But actually, I think probably 50%, if not more, just come for a good nosy round the neighbour's farm, and that's really important. We don't want to be too pure and too intense on the subject, because what I'm increasingly aware of is that different farmers and landowners are at different stages of the journey, and if you go in too deep and go in with lectures and it becomes too academic, you will lose people, and so it's really important to create that convivial, open knowledge exchange, because different people will be at different stages of the journey, and some people will be quiet and sitting at the back just listening and watching, and then a year or two down the line you'll find that that's when they sort of start going into some of these more agroecological, regenerative, whatever you want to call it, farming methods and techniques and conservation projects. So there's a very broad spectrum of reasons why people come to the events, and what makes a successful event one month will be completely different to another month. But the important thing is to have that balance of open conversation, but also something there that's underpinning it with a bit of credibility, fact, research, but never too intense on the academic side.
Yeah. Well, you always hear, don't you, that if you're on a car journey with a farmer, they're always looking over the hedge to see what other people are doing in their fields. So actually, by organising these visits around other people's farms, that's a really good way to get people talking, isn't it, and sharing what they're doing.
Absolutely. And, we all like to go and travel around the country and go to groundswell or go and look at what's going on in different parts of the country. But having something at the end of a busy day, sort of 4:00 in the afternoon, it's an hour long, couple of hours long, with maybe a few refreshments, helps lubricate the conversation. Yeah. But the important thing is that local context, particularly when you start talking about project work and how you're going full on into one big, river restoration project or creating new species-rich, flower-rich meadows, can be quite daunting with the sort of specialist kit that's required, or the the permits and licenses required for a river restoration project or something like that. It gets quite technical quite quickly. So knowing who to go to locally is really important, and to sort of unpick the wood for the trees, really. It's important, I think, to be aware of what's going on in your patch.
And I think, so a small project on one farm might make a small impact, but if you have a few on different farms, it can really have a big effect, can't it? We were talking earlier about the landscape recovery project that you're involved in. I don't know if you could explain what's happening there.
Yeah, well, the cluster started, as I say, around sort of Lynham, and originally we used farming in a protected landscape because we're in the Cotswold National Landscape, the AONB. So we were open to the grant application for that fund. And a group of 4 or 5 farms had a go at coming together to knit up their countryside stewardship schemes to add the bits that you couldn't get through CS, through countryside stewardship, and work down one stream, one tributary to the Evenlode. I'm an ecologist by background, and these ecological challenges that we're facing, water quality and water resilience, carbon capture, all these sorts of things, are very hard to work in isolation and navigate in isolation. So the whole is so much greater than the sum of the individual parts when you're talking about these big challenges. And so we took learnings from that initial project on the 4 or 5 farms around Lynham, and when the window, we knew about landscape recovery as one of the sort of 3 components of ELMS, Environmental Land Management Scheme, and when the window came open, a couple of farms and a couple of the bigger farms were very keen to jump into this, and had dabbled in a few projects in their isolation, but actually recognised this value of doing it across the whole river course, and that was actually the Dawn and the Glyme, which are 2 big tributaries to the Evenlode. And so I thought, well, we could have a punt. We could have we go through the application and see what could come of it. And then before I knew it, we were looking at about a dozen, maybe 15 or so farms that were all committing to landscape recovery on the Dawn and the Glyme. I thought, well, actually, there's some amazing examples up the Evenlode as well. It would be silly not to include those. Yeah. And before we knew it, we had 47 farms in the landscape recovery project. And now we're up to 60. Now we're actually underway. And this isn't about the whole farm going into ecological abandonment, ring fencing, stopping any more farming, and letting it go wild. The beauty, and actually this is one of the great challenges one of our directors, Tim Coates, threw up to DEFRA when we applied, is landscape recovery shouldn't and isn't about just ring fencing and abandonment. It can, we can have nature recovery, landscape recovery interwoven through the whole landscape and still be productive. We're in a mixed farming landscape here in the Evenlode, and So we have arable, we have livestock, we have areas which are less productive that would actually suit to being flooded and holding water back, or connecting woodlands that would provide incremental benefits in connectivity. And so we took several percent, so 7, 8, 9, 10% of each farm across those 60 farms to go into landscape recovery, most of which are in the floodplain. And actually we're speaking at a time where 2 days ago, most of that land was underwater. And so with this increasing uncertainty of not just weather patterns and flooding, but also the cost of production in some of these less productive, less manageable areas of the farm, are better off just a long-term conservation project. And so that's the approach we took with landscape recovery. Let's not do the whole of farms, but pick those less productive areas of the farm using the data. And that knits quite nicely into the carbon baselining project we did. And that was with Rothamsted Research Institute. And across 40 farms now, we've got over 16,000 hectares of soil carbon baselined to 30 centimetres. And that gives us not just a baseline for carbon markets or for SFI, soil standard claims, but also it shows you the options and the areas where you're low and have potential to increase. It shows the headroom for improvements. And you're comparing again to a landscape benchmark, so we can aggregate the data and take the average, and you can say, well, that field's doing really well, it's above the average for the area, or it's below par, and that's where I should be pumping some carbon into the soil and really focusing on soil health and rehabilitation. So all of these projects have come together over the last sort of 2.5 years to support each other and ultimately support the transition into elms and these new natural capital markets.
And these, the funding you get for these sorts of projects, like the carbon baselining, is something that maybe farmers wouldn't do individually off their own back, but having that funding and having the person like you to organise it all has meant that people can get that data about their own farms, so it helps them as well as the whole area.
Yeah, exactly. I think facilitators, I call myself a facilitator, have an amazing role where we can create great efficiencies across farms. And some larger farm contracting businesses or estates can afford to take on. I mean, our latest project is a deer census. We're overrun with fallow deer, muntjac deer. There's no market in the venison market because they're too small, and the roe are doing very well as well, too well. And so we're doing a big deer census, but farm by farm, there's no real incentive to go and measure how many deer you've got on the land. But when we aggregate it, we're actually doing it with Farming to Protected Landscape. Hopefully, fingers crossed, we haven't actually won that funding yet. But the idea is that the efficiencies you can get and the data, because obviously deer are quite transient, or can be, and so you can come up with a landscape management plan for deer. And some of these fallow herds can be having massive crop damage results in arable systems, as well as the challenge, if we want to plant 800 hectares of trees with the landscape recovery, the cost of deer management then is going to be very high. So it's having a facilitator that can put in an application to FIPL or any of the other landscape recovery or the other grant streams that are out there is very very useful for farms, I would like to think. But also, it's not just about the grant funding. It's the grant funding there is there to catalyse these. The soil carbon baseline is there to catalyse whether it's carbon markets or biodiversity net gain markets. So we've done a big baseline of the floodplain meadow communities on the River Windrush. So there's 700 hectares, I think it is now, has been walked over and assessed with more detailed surveys and some of the hot spots. and that is going to tee us up for a proper farmer-led strategy for restoration of some of these unique habitats, which are very special in this part of the world. So the aggregation of efforts, the facilitation by to go for those grant applications. I'm no expert in all of these subjects, but if you can pull in the experts for those farm advice walks and so on, it really helps galvanise the action.
And I know another thing that you're looking at, talking about the deer, is supply chains, local supply chains, how to get things to market. Would you be able to expand on that?
Yeah, so going back to sitting in the room here at Farm Ed before it properly opened, we had the flip chart. We always want to be farm-led. I guess the priority was always soil health, because we all know it all comes back to soil. The greatest asset for a farm is its soil. So that was the main focus to begin with, the first couple of years, and then spilling into habitat creation and water storage and flood mitigation and all these things. But ultimately, unless you want to be a subsidy junkie, you've got to be very careful you're not detaching yourself from the market, because the more high quality grass-fed, native breed livestock that we require to manage these rare habitats like the floodplain meadows and so on, and we do need these livestock to do it, the more opportunity there is to put a premium on it and sell it for the proper value of that meat, not just as a source of protein, but also nutritious protein that's high in omega-3 fatty acids, all that sort of thing. And so as a group of farms, being able to get access to markets like that is really important. And the plight of the small abattoir is never more apparent. And so how we can create value in our produce is really important, and we can hopefully come together, not as a sort of formal cooperative, but cooperate and create some market traction. Supply the local schools, ideally supply the John Radcliffe Hospital in Oxford, which is enormous catering demands, and get some true value back from the work that's going on in the cluster.
Because as well, we talk about the true value of food. I know it doesn't necessarily need to be more expensive to the end consumer. It's just taking out those links in the middle. If we can sell direct with these small amounts of livestock, then that can work quite well. Just finally, what I'd like to ask is, how can people get involved? How can they find out more about the North East Cotswold Farmer Cluster? How can they get involved with that, and also elsewhere in the country?
So local farms to here, we're always very keen for new members, and we do have different sort of tiers of membership, but ultimately we get supported by DEFRA for having farmer members within our area here in the North East Cotswolds, and then we will gladly welcome followers, as we call them, or friends that want to keep abreast of what we're up to. So there's membership you can click on for that, and we do find quite a lot of land agents, agronomists, ecologists, all sorts of different people come along to our farm walks, and whilst our main focus is our farmer members, it creates that richness and diversity if we've got other followers and friends coming along to contribute to the conversation. And then, nationally, the movement of farmer groups is really picking up, and I don't know whether that's because things like landscape recovery or access to some of the new funding streams works better as a group. But yeah, there are farmer groups popping up all over the place. We have actually a really rich conversation with other farm groups in the Thames area, and that suits us because there's things like the Thames Valley Flood Scheme. We would love to be able to link up with other catchments in this area, and so there are clusters around, farmer groups around that can be signed up to. But obviously, if you're in this area, we'd very much welcome anyone on board.
That's brilliant. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Tim. We're definitely going to keep up with what the cluster's doing, and hopefully we'll speak again in the future.
Thank you very much.